Good evening, everyone. We're going to be starting in a couple of minutes. We're just waiting for people to join in the webinar. They're coming in. I think I'll go ahead and get started. I think we will have more people come in, but we'll go ahead and get started. So good evening, everyone. My name is Dr. Elena Rios. I'm president of the National Hispanic Health Foundation, and we're very happy to be here tonight. This is our quarterly webinar series on clinical research. And the title tonight is Webinar Diversify Your Trials, the Clinician's Guide to CRC-Powered Hispanic Recruitment. And we're going to hear from two experts, Yvonne Rodriguez, founder and CEO of Egality Sciences, Inc., and Carla Casulo, Dr. Carla Casulo, Associate Professor of Medicine at the Wilmot Cancer Institute with the University of Rochester in upstate New York. And they will lead us into a question and answer period, and we'll talk more about our logistics in a minute. I just wanted to welcome you and also to recognize our sponsor tonight is Amgen, and we also have a CME credit. Next slide. So in terms of some of housekeeping, we want to be sure that all participant microphones will be muted. Please feel free to type your questions. We have a discussion session after the two speakers in the Q&A box. And then please fill out the short post-webinar survey that will be emailed out after the event and also shown as a QR code at the end of this webinar. The recording will be housed at our NHHF website, which is nhmafoundation.org, and sent out 1 week after the event. Next slide. This is our accreditation statement. We have one AMA Category 1 credit. Doctors, nurses, others that can get these credits, you're welcome to apply for it. Next. The objectives tonight are really to emphasize the significance of cultural competence among clinical research coordinators when working with Hispanic populations, and to address the importance of clinical research coordinators in promoting diversity and inclusion within clinical trials, particularly among the Hispanic population, so that physician principal investigators or others in research can improve their clinical research outcomes. Next slide. So the National Hispanic Health Foundation, for those of you that don't know about it, we have a mission to improve the health of Hispanics in the United States and other underserved by promoting the education and awareness of the population, advancing research, and advocating for policies that address the unique health needs of our population. The foundation seeks to reduce health disparities and ensure equitable access to health care. And I'm already getting a question. Let me just go ahead and tell everyone, of course, we will have the slides available, and we will have them on our website and also the YouTube channel. Next slide. So we decided that we needed to really focus on diversity within clinical trials, but that there was other research that we could help with as being a resource. So we decided to start the National Center for Hispanic Health Research. This was back in 2021. The mission is to understand and address the unique health needs of Hispanics with an unwavering commitment to fostering health equity through education and awareness. One of the main objectives is to elevate the prominence of Hispanic physicians and other researchers in clinical research within Hispanic communities. So with a steadfast focus on advancing research, education, and advocacy, it's actually the NHHF and our Center for Hispanic Research is poised to lead transformative initiatives that promote the health and well-being of Hispanics across the nation. Next slide. So what we have now with our center is a Hispanic Health Research Registry. I think we have about 3,000 to 4,000 Latino doctors who are experienced in clinical trials in that registry. We also have an education program because of our conference with the National Hispanic Medical Association participation and our webinar series. We are actually dedicated to disseminating knowledge, sharing best practices, and fostering dialogue among many stakeholders invested in Hispanic health research, thus nurturing a community of informed advocates and practitioners. We also have a mentorship program, acknowledging the pivotal role of mentorship in shaping the next generation of Hispanic health researchers. Our mentorship program empowers medical students and residents to pursue careers in clinical research. And we will be announcing this mentorship program at our 30th anniversary summit, which takes place in April, and I'll tell you more about that in a minute. Next slide. So we have now our speakers, and Yvonne Rodriguez will be our first speaker. Yvonne, go ahead.
Thank you, Dr. Rios. So the objective tonight is to, again, emphasize the significance of cultural competency among the clinical research coordinators, or your CRCs, when working with Hispanic populations. So who can be a CRC or a coordinator? Typically, a CRC can be a registered nurse, or they can have a bachelor's degree in a scientific, health-related, or business administration program. There is no hard and fast rule on, this, who can be, if they have a certain degree. There are many physicians actually that choose to elevate their most trusted, nurse, medical assistant, LVN to these positions. And the reason for that is, go ahead, next slide. And the reason for this is because this person basically manages the conduct and the day-to-day activities of the clinical trial. They become your right hand. In general, they have to make sure that the clinical study maintains the good clinical practice, that everything has been reviewed and approved by the institutional review board before any consent takes place, or that there's a kickoff at your clinic. But they do go above and beyond administrative duties. The CRC role can include, acting as a liaison for the clinical site, ensuring that all the staff is properly trained, everything is documented properly in your regulatory binders, and making sure that patients that are registered may follow the protocol and have adherence to it. They are also responsible for collecting, reviewing, and entering the data into a study base. Next slide. Depending on the type of trial that you may have, whether it's sponsored, academic, or investigator-initiated, there are times that the CRC role can assist with development of some protocols and reviewing for standard of care. This is typical, again, with the academic or investigator-initiated trials. Typically, they're always recruiting patients and actively looking through your EMR systems, or whatever system you have that has your patient's information in there. And again, they collect the data they actually create source documentation based on the protocol. And understand the critical data points that have to be collected and that sponsors are looking to receive before sending to the FDA. One of the other items that's extremely important for the CRC role is to maintain appropriate records. If it's not documented, it didn't happen. And training all of the staff that takes part in the trial is part of that documentation. They have to ensure that everyone signs off when they were trained. And if a new version of a protocol comes out, they also have to be retrained on that section of the protocol. They also have to take accountability logs of every item. For example, they have to document investigational product. They have to make sure that any devices or anything auxiliary that the study needs are also logged and documented. And they have to make sure, again, that every piece of paper that is patient-facing and even the protocol review and approval is properly filed in your clinic. They have to file everything in the trial master file. It has to be kept up to date and accurate. They have to also go through any information that comes from the sponsor or the contract research organization, and have to print out and file key messages and communications. This is important because this is a way to prove that the CRC and your clinic are up to speed on all communications related to the trial. And they also prove that the person has read and understands, the latest information. It's also important to know that the CRC typically stores this information in case of a future audit, either from a sponsor, a pharmaceutical company, or the FDA. Next slide. So the CRC role ensures that clinical research is conducted ethically. They make sure that, again, I believe I already said that patients are adherent. If they are not, they typically are the ones to find out and document and have that discussion with you and the sponsor on whether a patient continues or not. They are the ones that, if they find something unethical, would be the key point person to go to and report this to the institutional review board and the sponsor. And additionally, they would probably be the key person to communicate on next steps for escalation. Moving on, we have the preparation, as I mentioned, of the study documents. They are responsible for not only recruiting the patients, but pulling the charts and preparing those patients for you to see them depending on the visit of the protocol. They basically pull the charts, they have them ready days prior to patient's arrival. They also pull charts for your clinical research associates or the monitors, typically sent by the sponsor and or the contract research organization to make sure that your site is fully compliant. But they are usually like I said, your right hand, because they know what assessments need to take place, knowing what needs to be brought to your attention during that patient's visit, whether it's a review of labs, scans that have to take place, and reports that come in from either central laboratories, your local labs, or other physicians that are contributing. By being able to be prepared, they do have to understand the schedule of assessment, and they basically understand things that have to be completed in certain order. Depending on the complexity of the trial, some of these trials require that certain assessments be done in a specific order, and basically they have to walk this patient through either the clinic or a hospital or academic center, and to make sure that this is adherent. Ensuring the right staff and date and time, everyone's present so that things take place at the right time. Next slide. So the significance of cultural competence brought up by the CRC is that they need to be well-versed with all the cultural nuances of the Hispanic population that they work with. Knowing, it's important that they may know the language, they may understand it, they understand the cultural beliefs, they have have an understanding of the health practices, and they make sure that they make the patient feel comfortable with making sure that patients share that information so that they capture everything appropriately. Typically, the coordinators ensure that information, the informed consent process is culturally sensitive, or that they understand, piece by piece, what is exactly that's going to happen. And if, they're able to understand whether the patient is uncomfortable and alleviate some of their concerns. For the most part, a CRC can be responsible for the informed consent and the reviewing of the translation of the informed consent. So it's important at times, if you have a CRC that knows the Spanish language and can read and write it, it's important that they review it. I myself have had several instances where I've reviewed consents and the Spanish is not translated appropriately, or it's a different Spanish. We have several variants. We have Mexican Spanish and Dominican Spanish and Puerto Rican Spanish, and it's important that your CRC reviews. Your sponsor may send you something, but it may not be relevant to your community. So it's important that they check. It's important that they weigh in and then have those changes so that when the person or the patient reads that information, they feel comfortable knowing what they're reading. But there are, if in case, that they do have that, they are able to answer and even explain, what things mean if they don't understand the consent form. And obviously by being able to address, they're also not able to address the informed consent information, but they're also able to address misconceptions that patients have about clinical trials. Next slide. So typically the CRC ends up being the primary point of contact. I can tell you that having been a CRC myself, I did build a lot of relationships with the patients that I saw on a day-to-day basis. I was able to not only explain the consent, but kind of also be able to guide the patient in case they had a problem with scheduling, a problem just to make sure that people stayed within windows, ensure that I advocated for the patients, got them transportation vouchers or meal vouchers in case the patient was there for a few hours at a time. It was important for me to be able to, as a Spanish-speaking CRC, it was important for me to be there alongside with the PI or my principal investigator to ensure that the patient was able to ask the right questions, be able to be clear on the expectations of a trial, and be able to make sure, or rest assured that the patient was going to be adherent. I was able to schedule patient visits according to the protocol again, and understand that if there were caregivers, as most Hispanic families may have caregivers or family that they rely on, understand living situations, understand if perhaps, schedules had to be shifted in order to meet the needs of the patient. But it was building that rapport with the patient and understanding the family situation and how they dealt with their day-to-day that I was able to better assist and help them be more successful at being a clinical trial participant. Now, with regard with helping with data collection, it was very important, I think, that you build that rapport as a CRC to get the full medical history. It's very usual that patients say that they're not diabetic and they have diabetic medications. So once it's easier to be able to address that and say, if you're taking these medications, once you build that relationship, you're able to get the full picture. And it's very important in the trial setting. Not only this, but also capturing protocol-related data points. If there were, quality of life questionnaires, not just, giving them the questionnaires and saying that they had to fill them out, but explain further why those questionnaires were needed and why they were important. And this did help with adherence, and it helped with the completion, or they felt empowered to share more information within those questionnaires. And last but not least, the ability of the cultural competence also makes it easier to inquire about any adverse events or serious adverse events. Once a CRC builds that relationship with their patient and with your patient, it's easier to be able to understand what they're trying to say, if they're trying to describe symptoms, if they're describing many symptoms, does it mean that it's several adverse events or one event? And you're able to better document that information. Next slide. So collectively, all of these activities that build communication strategies and relationships with the enrolled participants and patients foster that respect for the patient. It brings trust, it brings increased participation engagement. They feel proud to be contributing to science in their own way. There's an improved understanding of what's going on with the patient, and the CRC is able to help bridge that information to either the CRO or the sponsor. But most importantly, you always have increased patient safety. Next slide. And I'll turn it to Dr. Casulo.
Dr. Casulo, yeah, you're on now. Thank you.
Yes. Hi, good evening, and thank you so much for the invitation to be here. So I'm an associate professor of medicine. I'm a lymphoma specialist, so I'm a medical oncologist at the University of Rochester at the Wilmot Cancer Institute. And today we'll be talking about clinical research coordinators and really how to address the importance of clinical research coordinators in helping to promote diversity and inclusion within clinical trials. I think this is incredibly important in the Hispanic population, and this really is oriented towards helping us as investigators achieve the best clinical outcomes possible. Next slide, please. So why does it matter to have diversity and inclusion in clinical research? So over the last several decades, we've learned that diseases are experienced and manifested very differently based on someone's socio-cultural background and ancestry. And in fact, drug effectiveness has been shown to vary based on someone's ancestry. An example of this is in blood pressure lowering medications, including ACE inhibitors and beta blockers, which have different responses in patients that are either African American and white background. This is one example, but really illustrative of the fact that one disease is not the same in many different patients. And so for all communities to benefit from different advances in science, and in order to have generalizability of clinical trial results, clinical trials have to be inclusive of patients from diverse backgrounds. But that's not always the case, and unfortunately, a lack of diversity in research has created gaps in our understanding of disease biology, disease prevention, and treatment efficacy across different populations. Next slide, please. So there have been a really interesting set of changes that have taken place in clinical research and requirements for diversity and inclusion over the last several years. And this started historically in the 1970s, with what's known as the syphilis study at Tuskegee, which was a very famous study that was a sort of a negative event in the history of clinical research, which took place in Tuskegee, Alabama, and was essentially emblematic of a lack of patient consent and not having equipoise in clinical research. And very briefly, this was a study conducted in mostly African American men who had syphilis, and the CDC actually wanted to study the role of untreated syphilis in various different populations. And this is despite the fact that penicillin became available as a treatment for syphilis later, about 15 to 20 years into the study. And so unfortunately, this was considered a negative event. It's disincentivized racial and ethnic minority populations to participate in community research and to participate in clinical trials because they felt that they were not being treated adequately and fairly. That and other events historically led to the creation of what's known as the Wilmot Report, which was determined to address ethical principles and guidelines to help to protect human subjects and ensure their safety in clinical research. So subsequently, in the 1990s, the National Institute of Health created the Revitalization Act, which established guidelines for the inclusion of women and people from racial and ethnic minority populations to participate in clinical research. And this mandate said that clinical trial participants must reflect the diversity of the real world in order to have generalizable findings to entire populations. So that if a drug is approved for something, we have to ensure that the participants that were included in this research, we can say with confidence that these results are generalizable. Next slide, please. Later on, the FDA also developed guidelines to help enforce that diversity and inclusion in research, and they published recommendations for industry sponsors to initiate and conduct clinical trials. And those recommendations stated that eligibility criteria had to be broad in order for clinical trials to avoid unnecessary exclusions. Clinical trials had to be designed in a way that achieved participant diversity. The clinical trials had to be designed in a way where recruitment practices had to be better. And these recommendations for broad eligibility had to also be in place for treating rare diseases and rare conditions. But not only for the sponsors that conduct trials, but also for the clinicians and the researchers in different institutions, the responsibility also lies with us in order to ensure that any potential barriers can be addressed and changed in order to have more inclusive study populations. Next slide. So clinical research coordinators, as we heard earlier, have a really important role in helping to promote diversity and inclusion. And I find that the clinical research coordinators at our center, they play such a pivotal role in the day-to-day activity, and not only in data collection and data integrity, but they really get to know the patients very well. And I feel like it's a really comprehensive community that's built with the clinical research coordinators and the physicians and members of the clinical trials office. So I find that the clinical research coordinators can actively engage with Hispanic communities to raise awareness about clinical trials. They also can collaborate with other leaders within your community and with different organizations to help to disseminate information and address any concerns and help to foster a positive perception about clinical research participation. One of the things that happen in our center is that our Office of Community Outreach and Engagement is embedded within our clinical trials office, and it helps to ensure that the research that's being done and that the trials that are being developed by our cancer center are responsive to the needs of the community. And that doesn't happen everywhere, but I feel like that is gaining momentum across the country in order to really ensure that we are responsive to the needs of the environment that we practice in. This is also important in terms of outreach and education. And clinical research coordinators can also provide targeted education to inform populations within the Hispanic community on the importance of clinical trials. Another way that this is done is, at our center in particular, is that clinical trials that are looking to answer questions specifically about underrepresented populations, the Community Outreach and Engagement Office goes out and tries to help with recruitment strategies and help to explain what is the purpose in lay terms. Why is this important? How is this going to help not only potentially the participants, but also help to promote the science moving forward? Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Okay. So I believe strongly that clinical research really does require diversity and inclusion, not just because of what the NIH says and because of what the FDA says, but because according to last year's US Census, over a third of the US population is comprised of minorities. And you can see here where the majority of Hispanic and Latino communities are distributed primarily along the coasts, but this really exemplifies the need for having the research that we conduct include the population that we treat. And so again, in order for results to be generalizable, in order for us to have confidence in the results of different trials, we have to ensure that diversity and inclusion is really well represented. Next slide, please. There's different strategies that have been developed to help promote diversity in clinical trials. So one of the things that's being done is to develop clinical trial sites in areas with a higher concentration of underrepresented ethnic minorities. One of the things that happened at my center in upstate New York is that we have a tool where we can identify areas that have a stronger concentration of different cancers, different incidences of different cancers. Where are those patients coming from? Where do they reside? And are they being enrolled in clinical trials? Do we have cancer center satellite offices that are located within those communities? And that tool, which is it's called Canvas. This tool has really led to changing the landscape of our cancer center and led to the development of another satellite office from our cancer center in this strategic location in order to increase the representation of patients enrolled on clinical trials. So I feel like that's an important thing to bear in mind, is that sites should be located where the patients are. We should bring the research to the patient. I think also important is to diversify who is conducting clinical trials. Can we identify patients that have a preference for healthcare providers, be they women healthcare providers, be they Latino healthcare providers, because this helps to instill a sense of belonging. It helps instill a sense of understanding. And in fact, the FDA is recommending that sponsors consider selecting healthcare providers and study coordinators that can assist with clinical trial recruitment and implementation. That's part of a lot of strategies that are happening all over the country to increase diversity in clinical trials, both on the industry side and on the investigator side. And we may hear a little bit more about that, but that's a really important initiative that's going on across the country. Next slide, please. Other recruitment strategies involve using culturally appropriate communication channels. We heard about how research coordinators can help to develop some of these educational tools. They can participate in community events. For example, we have community events where our research coordinators in our community outreach and engagement office goes into different malls, goes into libraries, there's pop-up events around our region to help to incentivize people to participate in clinical trials and learn about clinical research. And then helping coordinators collaborate with us and sponsors to really develop recruitment strategies. And actually, as Yvonne mentioned, industry partners have a very vested interest in helping to diversify their patient population, and often are seeking strategies to improve recruitment, are seeking ways to develop tools to increase recruitment. Cancer centers and other academic institutions also have different clinical research offices outside of the clinical trial office itself that can help to develop webinars and Facebook recruitment tools and other flyers and things like that in order for patients to know that these trials are ongoing and that they're advertised in a way that we can increase the amount of patients that participate. Next slide. Clinical research coordinators also really help to improve health literacy. We heard about how they contribute to developing the consent forms, ensuring that information is clear and understandable. They really are the liaison between the clinical trial and the physician, and there's a closeness that develops, and they definitely help to advocate for best practices and inclusive recruitment practices in order to help to prioritize diversity and recruitment. Next slide. I think one of the important things that clinical trial coordinators play a role is in not just the cultural competency and the community engagement and advocacy that we've heard about already, but I feel like it's a really beautiful and fulfilling career trajectory. I find that some clinical research coordinators view it as a step in their career for a different role later in life, possibly going to medical school, possibly going into a graduate program, or it can even be a career in and of itself with a lot of upward mobility. I've listed that website there that looks at what a career in clinical research can look like as a clinical trial coordinator. But I think that it's really, again, such a pivotal role that without research coordinators, there is no way that we could conduct research. And I really do feel like these clinical trial coordinators have a pivotal role. And so again, I think that aside from the career trajectory and the internal mechanism of improving health for Latinos, it's an incredible part of clinical research. Next slide. All right, and now we can open it up to question and answer. Thank you so much for the invitation.
Thank you both. I think this was a great webinar with lots of good information about encouraging more people to get involved in clinical research. Too often we just focus on the protocols and not the people and the workers and the health workforce that we need to diversify too. I don't know how many clinical researchers in this country are Latino, but I can tell you for doctors, it's 6 to 7%, depending on what data you look at. And for medical students, it's been pretty flatlined for 50 years. And I think we're going to see numbers increase in all of our health workforce as the population increases. As you said, it's already we're at 1 out of 5 Americans, almost 20%. And in the next 10, 15 years, we'll be 1 out of 4 Americans. So we will definitely see a stronger need for the Spanish-speaking task forces, all of the panels that do research. So we have some questions here, and I know our good friend Dr. Laura Williams has a few questions. She's studying for her PhD in research. Laura, thank you. One question is, are there any studies like the Tuskegee study that you know of that represented the same type of, I'll just say problems, issues, unfortunate outcomes, but in the Latino population? Yvonne, do you know of any?
Yes, there was, and I actually do talk to it when I speak to community healthcare workers and CRCs. So there was a contraceptive clinical trial in Puerto Rico, and this was actually in the mid-50s and lasted about 5 years, where women were not told that they were participating in this trial. And so it really, these group of women in these trials pioneered the way for oral contraceptives, but were not told. So we do make it a point to make sure that when we do teach about clinical research, whether it be in the community or the CRCs, that we bring these atrocities to the forefront, to also provide education on laws and laws in place in order to prevent that in the future.
And for Dr. Casulo, I mean, another question that came up was, what's the, if you can describe the accountability for the agencies? I'll just say FDA, because you mentioned that at the end, that the FDA does have a requirement now for diversity within the private sector's clinical trials, from not only the investigator and the patients. And I'm not sure if you mentioned that clinical research coordinators also have to be held accountable. But how do they do it? And what do we do to make sure they're trending in the right way?
That's a good question. So my understanding is that any study that's funded by federally funded has to report on all participants that are from underrepresented groups, and even have outcomes reported based on their ethnicity. This is something that's becoming really important in industry-sponsored studies as well, where more and more people are actually requesting whether or not how many number of underrepresented groups have been included, were there any differences based on underrepresented groups, and that's something that's becoming, it's getting scrutinized really, really closely.
Mhm.
And so I know that that's something that is, if you go onto the FDA website and the NIH website, there are multiple requirements that clinical sponsors have to meet in order to be responsive to those requirements and those recommendations. They're held accountable when the study goes to the FDA for review. The IRB is also looking at this closely to ensure that the consent forms are culturally sensitive, and that consent forms can also be made available in different languages, and that those are also reflecting the study adequately.
Great. So we've got a few more questions. Please keep the questions coming in. If we don't finish tonight, we will have our speakers answer them, and we'll send them out with the slides. Okay. So another question is how can we facilitate more diversity in clinical research in a state like South Carolina, where our Latino population is growing really exponentially? So here we have an example of one of the states that you have shown in your slides about the growing population. And you don't think about the Southeast as being Latino traditionally, but we have so many more jobs available for our communities that they're going where the jobs are. So how do you, what would be a fast track for diversity in a state like that? Yvonne, you want to use that?
I personally feel that advocating, right? So something that you can do is, I know NHHF has some sponsors that are reaching out for and looking for Latino investigators. So if anyone is interested in having, research come to your clinic, I think this is an excellent way to raise your hand and be that champion. That's one. I know that routinely, some sponsors do reach out via the contract research organizations as well. And, a shameless plug, but Egality also, helps investigators that are new to research get training and get information on research. So I'll turn it to Dr. Casulo.
Thank you. Let me ask another question, Dr. Casulo, just to be able to get through some of these. We talk about the importance of the CRC as a career. And one of the questions was that it's been quite difficult to obtain an early entry level role. And I guess this person, anonymous person here, says that there's a requirement for 2 years of experience as a CRC or even CTAs, and if you can explain that. But any advice on how applicants with minimal experience can make can get more involved in clinical research?
That's a good question. So I think being involved in clinical research, if there is a requirement at your institution to have some experience, then one way to do it is to seek out people within your institution that are doing some form of research, because that's a stepping stone for you to see how clinical research is done. Perhaps there's an opportunity to participate in something retrospective. There's an opportunity to learn or shadow someone that's doing it and get a sense of what is data analysis and data entry look like. What are some of these databases? How do they work? How do you look and abstract through a patient's medical record? Some of those things, those basic skills that you can gain first by in a different position, not necessarily as a clinical research coordinator, because as Yvonne said, there is a lot of, while there's a significant amount of training that's involved, and there's a lot of detail that goes into the safeguarding of this patient confidentiality and data integrity. But some of that experience you can gain in another way. So I would, if you're interested in that, I would encourage you to seek out opportunities to participate in other forms of research. And then that's a way to get your foot in the door and see if that's something that you have an interest in, because I think those are transferable skills that you can take from one opportunity to the next and demonstrate that you have a sense of what it's like to participate. Going from 0 to 60 and without having any context, I think it's going to be a little bit challenging. But
Right.
getting a little bit of a sense of what does it look like? What does it mean? What does it look like to open up a patient's chart and understand how to data abstract some of these concepts and grading the toxicities and things like that. So I'd encourage you to seek out opportunities to get some exposure.
Another question, and again, this goes to all of your experience. Are there any streamlined consent forms that would be easier to understand for patients like Latinos and others that have health literacy issues? We always talk about medical lingo and how we need to translate into common, simple language, but are there consent forms for clinical research that are less burdensome, let's say, or do you think that there isn't? Is there a need?
Every institution has an institutional review board that really looks at those consent forms very, very carefully and ensures that there is minimal medical jargon, that the educational level, that the reading level of the consent form is at a modest, a reading level in order to really not leave anybody out with who may not be as health literate. So that is an important component of what the consent form looks like. Even then, though, it still might be a little bit hard for someone to understand. And that's where the clinical research coordinator can help to further explain some of the assessments, further explain some of those things. But really, the full responsibility lies with the investigator. I actually sit down and I go line by line with my patients on every aspect, what they're checking off, what this means. And really, they should be left with the consent form for a period of time to ensure that they've had an opportunity to read through it carefully. Sometimes patients, in an effort to please, will want to say, "Okay, I'll do it if you think it's the best thing for me," and that's actually not the right way to do it. I really encourage them to say, "Look, you really have to understand what it is that we're doing, because I want to make sure that this is an informed consent, that you really fully understand everything." So responsibility really lies with the physician, the person that's, the investigator that's conducting that, to make sure that the person understands what they're getting into.
So this is an example of being a patient advocate and really trying to understand what the patient needs to understand to be able to better educate them. But let me ask you about, there was a comment made about being an advocate, the advocacy role for getting connected and linkages to the community. One of the questions, and that may be a comment, is that most clinical research is done in academic institutions where you have to be faculty. What about the private sector in terms of principal investigators? How can the clinical research coordinators be more, show advocacy initiative to help the private doctors or private clinics that are not in the academic world get connected to, I'll just say, better resources?
Did you want me to respond?
Sure. Well, either one, but
I can start by saying that there are always either a lot of sponsor companies do have a role of the medical science liaison. And this is a very key role because they do go to the physician's offices to explain the science behind a new medication, but they're also key people to know what they're already working on in the R&D space. And if the physician or the coordinator express any interest in, the future or what people are currently working on, they're actually a good window and a good champion for the clinic to be involved in future research.
Okay. Dr. Casulo, did you want to?
Completely agree. Yes,
Yeah.
I think the MSLs are a huge resource. And I view that there's actually large consortia across the country. There's the national community, there's a national consortium of community research where you can participate as a smaller practice in research. It's called NCORE, and NCORE is comprised of many, many hundreds, if not thousands, of practices all over the country where smaller, more private setting groups can still participate in research in either prospective registry research. I myself have some experience in that, in partnering with other community sites to in a registry type of setting to conduct prospective research, not an interventional trial, but conducting prospective research on in a registry setting. And that's another way for a community practice to be involved in research, is in registries, which can yield a tremendous amount of data. Even if it's not interventional, it could be really impactful at helping us learn the natural history of different diseases. So there are a lot of opportunities for that, I think. So you don't necessarily have to be in a major academic institution to have access to that.
Another question about another career, and that's the pharmacist, the role of Latino pharmacists, not the role of Latino pharmacists, but the role of research for a Latino pharmacist. How do you get involved in this research enterprise when you don't have experience, but you've been a strong community advocate as a pharmacist, where so many Latinos go, and you learn a lot more about how to develop the rapport. And I think the pharmacists play a really good example of what they could teach the clinical research coordinators about engagement. But anyway, they were just wondering if, I guess this question is about any opportunity besides the CRC education for a pharmacist to actually jump into research.
Actually, I would highly recommend. A lot of pharmacists are medical science liaisons. So they actually, are advocating, because they'll bring things to the community, new research proposals. But that is an excellent way for pharmacists to be involved, and be that, they deliver the content to the physicians on new medications.
Okay, great.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Pharmacists can also, again, this is more at the academic level, I think, but for a pharmacist that is interested in learning about being a clinical research pharmacist, that's also a path. And in our center, for example, we have clinical research pharmacists that dispense the investigational drug, that counsel patients, that really carefully scrutinize how the investigational product, i.e. the intervention, is being monitored, and all this data keeping. But then on another side, you can be involved in specialty pharmacy dispensing new investigational drugs, and that component of the clinical pharmacist has a lot of face time with the patient, and there's a lot of opportunity to really be involved on that level as well.
And the last question, and I know we have some more slides. A student is on the a health professional student, or let's say a pre-health student, I'm not sure what level the student is, asking about how we can help develop training of the next generation. Any thoughts? And, we've talked about our National Center for Hispanic Health Research wanting to be able to start a mentoring program. That's one way, but perhaps, with the organizations that you belong to on the clinical research side, are there programs already in existence for students who can really gain more expertise in research even before they go to nursing school or pharmacy school or medical school, and it actually improve their application immensely by having research opportunities? Do you know of any for the students? And we're going to talk about one right now, but if you guys know from your experience.
So as a medical oncologist, I can speak to the cancer aspect of things, but when I was in medical school, I really had the American Medical Association be a tremendous resource. There are a lot of tools and toolkits that you can learn from, and some basics of clinical research that you can learn from on the AMA website. And on the cancer side, there is the American Society of Clinical Oncology. It's known as ASCO. And the American Society of Hematology, known as ASH. Both of those have extensive and very robust training opportunities for trainees at multiple different levels, both on the resident side, medical student side, allied health professions. And I'm actually involved in one through the American Society of Clinical Oncology, where I help to train medical students that are Latino and African American in gaining exposure to careers in oncology. So I think that looking at some of those organizations might be a good resource. And then obviously the NHHF is a tremendous resource as well.
Okay.
And if I can add quickly,
go
there
ahead.
are also programs for either pre-meds or medical students via industry. And so they typically do work with your schedules, but they have rotations and they rotate through, industry on different roles so that there's a better understanding. And so that's also something that can elevate your application.
Well, let me thank you both. We've got a lot of ideas here, and I think our marching orders are to continue to build the experience and knowledge about different healthcare workforce opportunities within clinical research, and especially the mentoring and the training. Someone's asking for our emails and contact information. I think we can send that out. Candace, if you want to put it in the chat, or if each of you want to put your emails in the chat. But we will send more information out with the slides and the post survey. Candace, can you go ahead and move to the next slide? There's just a few slides that we wanted to show here at the end. So for NHHF, our upcoming events, we are very proud to announce that we are having our 30th anniversary. We've been around since 1994. And that celebration is going to be a leadership summit and an awards gala with our sister organization, the National Hispanic Medical Association. We will be having a clinical trials diversity plenary breakfast on Saturday morning, April 13th, Hyatt Regency Hotel in Washington, D.C. And we also have a special relationship now with our Robert A. Wynn Diversity and Clinical Trials Award Program. And these programs are, we wanted to announce it here because the Career Development Award application is open until May 13th. And that is for, I'm going to say clinical investigators, or those who want to be clinical investigators. There is another award program that they have that is a pathway program for students, and I believe it's for medical students. And we've had a couple of meetings now, and I know that Amgen, who's our sponsor tonight, is one of the sponsors of this diversity program, and it is, and Dr. Casulo, you may know, it is in the oncology space too. So it's a great opportunity here to have you with us. The clinical research webinar in our series, our quarterly series, will be May 14th. We have a great doctor, Dr. Ng, coming from the San Diego, Chula Vista area to be a speaker. And we will have more details coming. So let me just remind you, we have a post-webinar survey. We'd like all of you to answer that. We have a QR code is on the next page. Go to the next page, Candace. And then there's oh, I see Amanda is telling everyone to please know that there is a link to the WIN program. It's on the chat. And I'm just going to leave this up for a minute. Our post-webinar survey, it's really important to gather your feedback, because we would like to know if there was something that really resonated with you. We heard people really are interested in what our speakers say. It's probably very unique to have Latinos talk about the importance of their roles and experience in clinical research. And we would like to know how many more ideas do you have that we would like, you'd like us to answer. If you have any questions about our programs or events, please email us at nhhf@nhmafoundation.org. Next slide. Again, this is our 30th anniversary. I think I'll just say that we're really proud of coming 30 years full circle. And the NHHF, like I said, has been a foundation really focused on research and education. We've had PCORI grants to develop Hispanic agendas for his clinical research and the mentoring of junior faculty. But we really think now that we need to get a little younger and go to the, even if it's pharmacy students, medical students, the students that are already engaged in the healthcare workforce. And I think with Yvonne and Dr. Casulo's experience, having students that can get into the academic institutions as rotations, etc., will be very easy for us to help promote by identifying those programs. If you have any ideas on how to help us with developing a really a robust resource for training of the younger students, and even residents need to find funding. They need to learn how to start developing the networks with the clinical investigators so that they can jump out of residency into jobs. And residents, from pharmacy world or medical world or what have you, and the clinical research coordinators, I think it would be great to have more of a resource of where to go to get the education, especially in the states where there are a lot of Latinos looking for educational opportunities. They may not want to go all the way to medical school and waste 10 years of their lives, or spend 10 years of their lives in school, and jump into a really what seems like a very fruitful career in helping turn around diversity in our communities. Is there another slide? Oh, the Robert A. Wynn Diversity Program. Here it is. This is the program that we talked about. Here you have Amgen with other companies there at the bottom as the sponsors. And the Development Career Award is a 2-year program. And the Clinical Investigator Pathway Program, that's the one for students. It's a 6-week summer program. And you see you get paid. You have lots of instruction. And I think that we're very happy to be able to partner with the Robert A. Wynn program and starting to recruit for them. And this is just the beginning. We're also working with other, the EQB MED program, and we will be especially recruiting for the Southeastern United States for that program. And another slide. Okay, well, this is our slide for the sponsorship opportunities, mentoring programs, and donations to NHHF. Tax-deductible donations. We're a 501c3, and we look forward to building our partners and let everybody know that, if you're interested in clinical research with Latino patients and Latino investigators and others, we'd sure like to hear from you. We're looking for speakers. We're looking for mentors. And I think our networks, and I mentioned earlier, I just got a new database for medical students in certain states in the country. We're going to be sending out, important information. It might be key information that is timely to students, for example, for the summer program, for the WIN program, or other institutional external rotations, and direct them to our website and build up more of a resource on our website. And I want to thank Yvonne and Egality Sciences and all your team that I know you're growing, and Dr. Casulo for being an academic leader for us in New York. And thank you all. Thank the staff. Guillermo Mendoza is our associate director, and we have Candace and Viviana, who are our coordinators. And you guys have done a tremendous job. I look forward to building this program, and I think, and I want to thank Amgen, of course, for the sponsorship. And we look forward to our 30th anniversary. We hope you can join us in Washington, D.C., April 12 and 13. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Did you stop the recording?